Hey y'all, welcome back to the podcast. This is your host, Vashti Sarah, and you are plugged into All the Things. All the Things podcast, where we literally talk about all the things. So in light of that, this week's episode, we will be touching on what marriage isn't. I feel like a lot of the times we have this misconception about what marriage is and what it isn't, and we think it's roses and sunshine and flowers all day. And as great as that seems, as great as that idea sounds, that's just not the reality of it. So and that's not to say marriage is awful, because if y'all have followed along my personal journey, you know that I love marriage. I love being married. I'm a big advocate of it. I believe that we as humans, we were created to be with others. We were created to commune with others. So this is not a knock on marriage, but I did want to give a realistic perspective on what marriage isn't. So we're gonna unpack a lot of misconceptions and shed some light to the realities of what marriage is. But before I get into that, I do want to touch on what the Bible says about marriage. So for those of you who are faith-based and you grew up in church, you've probably heard a plethora of things with regards to what marriage is and what marriage isn't. You know that it's a biblical concept, but it's not just a biblical concept. It's a concept that we've followed for generations. It's a concept that even society has grasped onto and has adapted for themselves. So the Bible talks about this pretty heavily, especially in the in the New Testament, about how the man should treat the woman and how the woman should be submissive to the man. And the reality is, when you read that, you think, well, my husband is supposed to love me like Christ loved the church. The wife is supposed to be submissive to the husband. And all that sounds great. All that sounds wonderful, but reality is we live in a fallen world, and with a fallen world comes with, consequences, and not just consequences, but fallen people, fallen creatures. So Ephesians 5, I wanted to read a little bit into that for y'all. And that's Ephesians 5, verse 25. And it talks about instructions for a Christian household. And it says, submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. So that's the first thing we hear, submit. Not women submit only, submit to one another. Wives, submit yourselves to your own husbands as you do to the Lord. For the husband is the head of the wife, as Christ is the head of the church, his body, of which he is the Savior. Now as the church submits to the Christ, so also wives should submit to their husbands in everything. Husbands, love your wives just as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her, to make her holy, cleansing her by the washing with water through the word, and to present her to himself as a radiant church, without stain or wrinkle or any other blemish, but holy and blameless. This is the same. Husbands ought to love their wives as their own bodies. He also loves his wife. He who loves his wife loves himself. After all, no one ever hated his own body, but they feed and care for their body, just as Christ does the church. For we are members of his body. For this reason, a man leave his father and mother and be united to his wife, and the two will become one flesh. This is a profound mystery, but I am talking about Christ and the church. However, each of you also must love his wife as he loves himself, and the wife must respect her husband. So this is amazing. This is beautiful. This is what marriage should be like. Husbands, love your wife just as Christ loved the church. In other words, gave up his life for the church, sacrificed his life for the church, was on this earth for a specific purpose. Wives, submit to your husband, submit to your spouse, present yourself blameless, and the list goes on. And again, sounds great, sounds wonderful, but living in a fallen world essentially means that we are fallen people, we are broken people. So Christ laid out an outline of what marriage should look like, but being that we're fallen, being that we're broken, being that we're messy people, it's not going to look like this all the time, because we make mistakes, we mess up, we're wrestling constantly with our flesh and what we want to do versus what we know we should do. So, sorry for those who are watching on YouTube. You saw me made a really ugly face. But the first thing we're going to touch on today is romanticized expectations. So to kick things off, let's address the elephant in the room. And it's a big one. You know, social media and societal narratives contribute to unrealistic expectations about marriage, specifically when it comes to romance. And, you know, TV shows, movies, social media, we present, or they present, a picture perfect marriage focused on grand gestures, sweeping romances. You know, we portray like this heartwarming, you know, day to day life where it's just you're constantly being wooed by your significant other. And there's so many complexities to that, because reality is that's not what marriage looks like. My husband and I have been married for 2 years. Yeah, we're no expert. Well, actually, we're married for 2.5 years now. We're married for 2.5 years, so that's a big thing. But yeah, that we're no expert. However, we've learned during our 2 years of marriage and watching others and our mentors who have poured into us, you know, reality is marriage is not going to be perfect. It's going to be messy. It's going to have messy moments. And the idea of we're romancing each other every single day, you're going to get pleased every day, you're going to be happy with each other every day. He's going to buy me flowers every day and gifts, and I'm going to serve him, you know, selflessly every day. No, that doesn't happen. There are days I come home and I just genuinely don't want to serve. There are days when I come home and I'm so tired, I don't want to cook. There are days where, you know, Jared is just overwhelmed with what he's doing with work and life and business that he forgets to buy me flowers, or, you know, and the list goes on. So the idea of a romanticized life that every day is going to be filled with romance and roses and all that, that's a false reality. Now, there is an extreme where there are certain men who don't even put effort, and that requires a lot in itself. And there are certain women who don't put effort either. I'm not talking about that. I'm not talking about the men and the women who are in a marriage relationship and they are not even putting effort with each other. I'm talking about these expectations that things are supposed to be grand all the time. It's not. My husband and I woo each other as much as we can. We, you know, remind each other how much we love each other. And it takes a lot of work. It doesn't come easily. There are some days I'm just not in the mood. There are some days he's just not in the mood. But we find ways to live life together and to enjoy it and to give each other passes where it's, you know, you're fine, I'll make dinner tonight. Or my husband, especially now being pregnant, you know, your hormones all over the place, you're tired one day, or you have all the energy the next day. And, you know, he's taken up a lot of responsibilities where he's like, I'll put on a load of laundry for you, or I'll do the dishes for you. So these little things, like we compromise and we help each other where we lack or where we're lacking. Yeah, there's no such thing as romance every single day. That's just not it. And that's not to say, you know, you guys are out of the honeymoon phase. No, I will strive to be in the honeymoon phase for the rest of my life because I love my husband and he's the best gift that I've ever gotten. However, reality is, as humans, we struggle. As humans, Ephesians 5 is really hard to follow through, but it's something that we should strive to live by every single day whenever you're in a marriage relationship. It's not going to be easy. It's not going to be pretty. Some days are easier than others. Other days aren't. But, you know, for my husband and I, there are times where we'll go months without even one argument or one, like we'll have little squabbles here and there where I'll pick on him and he doesn't like it, or he says something in the wrong moment, I cry and we get over it. But, you know, we're such in a healthy spot in our life where we can go months on months without even having a dispute or a squabble. But it's because we've created a foundation where, you know, we communicate well and we share how we feel with each other and we're very honest about it. Again, not roses and daisies every day, but we're striving towards that because Ephesians 5, you know, Jesus is very specific about what the home should look like. And not Jesus, I believe it's Paul. But so Another thing I wanted to point out was the constant happiness. There's this common misconception that, marriage should always be a source of unending happiness. First of all, marriage should not be where you find your happiness. If that's why you got married, in order to be happy, then you entered into a marriage for the wrong reason. Marriage shouldn't be your source of happiness. The Lord is your source of happiness. He is your source of joy. He's your source of all the good things in this world. Marriage is a bonus. Marriage is something additional. It's where you present yourself to your spouse and you say, hey, this is what I have to offer you. I don't expect you to fulfill my needs. I don't expect you to bring, unending happiness in my life. Now, marriage does bring happiness. It does bring joy, but that's not the source of it. When it becomes the source, you are then idolizing marriage. And whenever we idolize marriage, we've placed marriage as a God over our life versus the one true God, the Savior. And we've removed him from his rightful place. So like any other relationship, it has its ups and downs. And there's this, again, social media, movies, and TV shows present this unexpected or unrealistic expectation of constant happiness. You're not going to be happy every day. You're going to come home upset because of something that happened at work. You're going to come home upset because, it's just been a long day, or you wake up on the wrong side of the bed, or, you got really bad news, or your husband or your wife forgot to do something and it made you unhappy, and the list goes on. Every day is not going to be all happy, joy, living life, thriving. Now, while we do strive for that, the reality is a lot of times, especially young couples, we get discouraged because, we're presented this idea, this is what marriage should look like. You will be happy for the rest of your life, which I'm pretty happy. I love where I'm at. If I could speak for my husband, I'd say he's pretty happy too. But you will have ups and downs. You will have moments where you are on a really high, you're loving life is amazing, but you'll also have really low lows. And you'll have moments where you're grieving. You'll have moments where, you're questioning, reality and got your purpose and all that, not questioning marriage. If you're questioning marriage, then that's a topic for another day. But you'll have ups and downs. You'll have moments where it's just really, really difficult. And that's a part of growth. That's a part of marriage. It's a part of the learning process and growing together and being together. And like the romanticized aspect where you are lacking, your spouse steps up. Where your spouse is lacking, that's where you step up. And my husband and I have come into a really great groove where, we help each other out. We're each other's partner. We are each other's best friend. And we have a cute little saying that's probably cringy to the rest of the world, but before bed, before we go to sleep, or if he just needs reassurance, or, if we're on a date, I'll look at him and I'll say, you're my best friend. And then his response is always, no, you're my best friend. And, we're each other's best friend. We're in this together for the rest of our life. And it's not something that we dread. I wake up every single day looking forward to see my husband. At night, I look forward to snuggling with him, to talking with him, to falling asleep next to him. And another cringy thing that we do, and he'll probably be upset that I'm giving away all our secrets here, is, before bed, I'll tell him my tail's wagging. And my tail's wagging is code for, I'm just ready to snuggle with you and go to bed. And that's most nights, if not every night. I'm like, my tail's wagging. And, he'll roll his eyes because, he's like, oh, here we go again. But it's something that he enjoys too. It's something he looks forward to. And now he's adopted that, where he's like, babe, my tail's wagging. And, he's just ready to wind down the night with each other. And it's so fun. It's enjoyable. But like I said, there's just misconception. Every day is not going to be happy. It's not. That's just the nature of it. And if you're going into marriage thinking every day is going to be happy and filled with joy, you're going to be disappointed, because life happens, stuff happens, tragedy happens, and it will affect you and your marriage, in turn, your marriage. So That's another thing I wanted to point out. Number 3, solving all problems. There's this myth that marriage solves all our problems. Again, if you're going into marriage to solve your life's problems, to escape from life itself, to escape, maybe your family or being in a tough relationship or whatever it may be, marriage is not the solution. The solution is seeking Christ and finding resolution there first before you enter into marriage. Because if you're going into marriage in order for it to be a solution to your personal and emotional issues, all you're going to do is bring detriment to that marriage. You're going to have a negative impact to your spouse. You're going to bring them down. You're going to cause more turmoil. And let's face it, you might end up in divorce. And I hate using that word. That's a rule in our house. We never use the word divorce. We never joke about it. We never mention it whenever we're having an argument. That's off the board completely. But the reality is, if you're going into marriage to solve your personal issues and problems, then it will fail. And that's not me trying to speak bad over, your why for marriage. It's just being brutally honest. And that's just the reality of it. It will fail. And you have to first fix you. And the only way you can be fixed, if you're a Christ follower, is seeking the Lord for redemption, seeking the Lord for healing. If you've been following my podcast, I emphasize over and over working on you, becoming the best version of you before you enter into a relationship or a marriage, much less a marriage. And that's what it requires in order to have a successful marriage, in order to have a successful relationship, is you working on you. Figure out you first before you bring someone along. Having someone tag along with your baggage will only bring them down. And if they're tagging along with you with their baggage, it's just a whole pile of mess. So it's not going to solve all your problems. If anything, it's just going to reveal your problems even more, because marriage amplifies the issues that you've already been struggling with. Marriage amplifies those areas in your life that needs a lot of work. So yeah, it doesn't solve all your problems. Another one is loss of identity. There's this fear that marriage means sacrificing individuality. And in all honesty, I see a lot of people fall trap of this. So I personally think this one is a choice. Something my husband and I did before we got married, and even while we were dating, is we figured out and we prayed and asked the Lord to direct us our specific paths, and our paths are going to somehow link together. We knew that God's going to align it where we're working with each other, but at the same time, independently, we have a specific purpose for the Lord. And I've seen couples time and time again, they give up entirely for the other spouse, or, they glean off the identity from their spouse. And a lot of times, I hate to say this because I have a lot of female listeners, is women, we're the ones that do that. We view submission as a means of losing ourselves and hiding behind our spouse. That's not how God created us to be. Submission doesn't mean that we become invisible. Submission doesn't mean that we no longer have a purpose. Submission is we respect our spouse, we respect the authority they have in the marriage, but at the same time, we know that we have a purpose. That purpose, aside from being a wife, aside from being a mother, is to follow the Lord. That's the first and foremost, is the Lord's will over our life. So, loss of identity. We shouldn't sacrifice who we are. We shouldn't sacrifice what God has called us to do because we're entering into a marriage. Marriage should bring out our purpose even more. Marriage should emphasize even more that God-given talent and calling you have over your life. And thankfully, it's a rarity when you find a spouse, especially a husband, who brings that out of you. I thankfully married a husband who is a go-getter, and he encourages me to go after my dreams. It's never, hey, can you sacrifice that for now because I'm focusing on me? No, like he always is pushing me to keep going, to follow what the Lord has called me to do, to discover new gifts and talents and to walk in that. And myself, the same with him. We're challenging each other all the time because as husband and wife, we should want our spouse to become better. We should want our spouse to be the best version of themselves. We shouldn't want them to just settle. And a lot of us as women, I'm sorry to admit it, but as women, we compromise and we settle and we say, I'll just be okay with where I'm at. And we don't have any plan or goals to keep walking and keep doing what the Lord has called us to do. So another thing is communication and compromise. Effective communication and compromise are often viewed as these are easy fixes. They're not. They are not easy. Jared and I are constantly learning how we communicate and how we compromise to help the other person. How I compromised and communicated in dating is completely different than in engagement, and it is completely different than marriage. And, adding a child to that this next year, it will look differently. How we effectively communicate, how we effectively compromise to help the other person, it's going to look different. It's not going to be easy, and it will never be easy because communication requires us to be completely transparent. And for a lot of us, and for me, it's one of the biggest things I struggle with, communicating effectively and honestly, because I'm such a people pleaser. I want, my husband to be pleased with everything, and I just want him to be happy. But there are moments where I have to step back and I have to say, well, I need to be honest with myself. I don't like that, or I need help with this. And, it's a constant learning curve where I have to develop that skill as our seasons change, as things shift in our life. So communication and compromise, it is not easy. It takes a lot of work, but once you actively practice it, it becomes easier and easier. Another thing is maintaining romance. So we started off with romance. We're going to end with romance. Romance isn't easy. There are days, especially ladies, if you are on your period, you understand that it can be a little bit impossible. So maintaining romance is not something that is easy for everyone. Some women, if maybe your hormone levels are, not leveled correctly and you don't feel like it. Maybe you're on your period. Maybe you're pregnant and in your first trimester and you're like, get away from me. These are all common things. For men, it could be they had a very stressful day and they're just not in the mood. Maintaining romance requires conversation. It requires communication. It requires compromise and understanding your spouse. We don't live in this picture perfect world where romance, whether it's sex or physical touch, what's it called? Quality time, gifts, where that is just easily accessible. It's not this fairy tale land where, I will want it all the time. He will want it all the time. I'm generous all the time. He's generous all the time. It takes work. But like I said, social media, all these different outlets make it seem as if it's so easy. It is not. And that's not to sound like doomsday or to portray marriage as this awful thing, because it's so beautiful, but it's the work that makes it even more beautiful. The work, the effort that I see Jared put in to making sure we have a great date night, or the effort he puts in to make sure like I'm okay and the baby's okay, or, the effort he puts into making sure that I'm comfortable whenever it's time, so all these little things are so important and pivotal in maintaining romance. It won't happen every day, but it might happen every day. Or there are periods where it happens every day, and there are periods where it's like, I need a break for now. But intimacy, the intensity of it, it takes time. There are periods of it. There are periods where you don't have it, and it just requires communication. It's not easy. Sometimes it's messy. Sometimes you cry communicating it, but that's just the nature of it. Marriage isn't all, flowers and daisies every day. Realistically, marriage is a lot of work. It's a lot of work, but it's work that is edifying. It's work that is worth it. It's work that I want to do every single day. If there ever comes a point where you don't want to work for your marriage or work towards your marriage, that's when you need to seek counseling. That's when you need to seek pastoral advice, because there's some disconnect there. And when there's a disconnect, then that's where, the devil will come in and, bring temptation, will bring thoughts, will bring, all these different things. So, marriage, it's a lot of work. It's beautiful. It's great. I encourage everyone to be married. I encourage people to it because it is a wonderful thing. It's a gift from the Lord. But what I hate is this false reality that it will be a perfect thing. It's not perfect. It takes a lot of work. It takes time. It takes building a foundation that will set you up for success. And I do believe, this is not being braggadocious by any means, but I do believe my husband and I set up a really good foundation, and that foundation started with the Lord. That foundation started with a lot of prayer. And it started with a lot of, seeking godly counsel. And those were building blocks. We just set those up before we got married. And now, we have our moments, we have our days, but for the most part, marriage is fun. And I know when we add a child into that mix, it will be as if we're starting all over again. But that's the beauty of it. It's a journey. It's a life that I would never, at least I haven't ever regretted, because it's fun and it's absolutely worth it. So romanticized expectations, constant happiness, solving all your problems. Marriage is the end all, where it solves all your problems, that, you lose your identity, that, communication and compromise comes easily, that romance is every single day and maintaining it is easy. Those are all myths. Those are all what marriage isn't. Next week, we'll talk about what marriage is, and it's beautiful and it's great. And obviously, it might be the opposite of everything I just said, but I just wanted to portray the reality of marriage for those of you who are contemplating it, for those of you who are newly entering it, for those of you who are maybe engaged. Don't fall trapped to the false reality of what marriage is. And it's not doomsday. That maybe I'll just add that one in there. Marriage is not doomsday. Marriage isn't where you just, that's it for you. Marriage isn't that at all. If it is, then you probably need to talk to someone, because that's not what marriage was intended to be. Marriage was intended to be beautiful. When, Paul describes it in scripture, when God describes it in the Old Testament, when Jesus describes it in the New Testament, it's such a beautiful thing. It's one of the greatest things you can do. It's one of the greatest experiences you can have. It's the best journey you can walk on. And, we weren't created to be lonely beings. We were created to beings that are connected with someone. And I think the best example of that is marriage. So I hope y'all enjoyed today's episode. Don't forget to tune into next week's episode about what marriage is. And I love y'all. I hope this gives some realistic perspective on marriage. I hope this gives you hope and encouragement that marriage is great, that it is beautiful. It's not doomsday. It's not also roses and daisies. But if you're implementing the right attitude, the right steps, it can be a beautiful thing. So I'll see y'all next time, and have a good one.